So Ernst Kirchner is an expressionist artist around the time of World War I. And this is his self-portrait, one of many he's done over his career, called Self-Portrait as a Soldier. Now that image is the one on the left, and the one on the right that I've included is one for contrast that we'll talk about at the very end of the video. So for context, Kirchner painted this a year after the start of World War I. Now, before the war had broken out, he had volunteered for the war, but volunteered to be a driver to try to avoid the heavy combat of being a soldier. And it worked. He did become a driver in the war, but was released probably about a year after because of just general ill health, I think both physical and mental. So when he comes back from that experience, that's when he paints this self-portrait. And so you definitely see the influence and impact of the war on him. Now, in terms of Expressionism era, he is part of the German Expressionist period, and a specific one called Die Brücke, which means or translates to the bridge. And Expressionism, anytime you hear that term, you always know that the artist is going to express their own emotions. And the Expressionist in this particular sub-era called Die Brücke is usually expressing it through distortions of form and color, which both occur here. Now, his art in the 1930s, so when the rise of Hitler and the Nazis, his art, along with many other more modern artists, are labeled as so-called degenerate by the Nazis. And they take all of the art from these individuals who they've determined to be degenerate, and they take the art and they exhibit it at at an organized exhibit in 1937 called the Degenerate Art Exhibit. And 32 of Kirchner's works were exhibited. And if you saw that exhibit, and I do have a picture here of one kind of display of it, you'd see sometimes the art pieces were hung upside down. They were included with insults and derogatory labels with the art. And a year after his work was depicted in this degenerate art exhibit of the Nazis, Kirchner ended up committing suicide. So his story is definitely one of sadness for the most part. And that's kind of the focus of the art piece here. Now I put a slide together for the bridge, or Die Brücke, with a quote by Kirchner, who was one of the founders of the bridge. And that quote is from the actual manifesto of the artists. And so the picture on the right is that actual manifesto and the quote that you're seeing. And the bridge association comes from a philosopher named Nietzsche that Kirchner had read, and where the bridge was used as a metaphor or symbol, as a connection from the past into the future. And so, our bridge artists are definitely influenced by primitive artists as the honest and true art form, which we've talked about in class. I'm not going to go into detail there, except to say that Germany, as well as France, was a colonial power in this time period in different parts of the world. So really our artists here, these European artists, similar to Picasso and Gauguin, are appropriating the art from those territories that they occupy. So again, always keep that in mind when looking at their art. But going back to the bridge association with Nietzsche, I think that the bridge was looking forward to the moderns, embracing modern art, but yet still, connection to the past and not be held back to the past. So the bridge is kind of looking back, knowing what's come before you, but moving forward into the future. Okay, content-wise. So you basically have Kirchner in the foreground in a kind of almost half of his body being shown here. He's dressed in military uniform. Clearly, he is referencing his time as a soldier or a driver in the war. He was not physically injured, but he's showing himself missing his hand. And that definitely becomes more of a symbol than anything else, a symbol of him, kind of like writer's block, where you have painter's block, I guess, where he could not paint. I think mentally he was stuck in what had happened to him and those experiences, the fear I think he had of going to the war, and that's why he volunteered to be a driver. So I think he had a deep fear of it beforehand. And then what he saw when he was in it was deeply troubling and impacted him tremendously. So in the canvas, he shows himself as having everything he needs to paint. He has a canvas. He has the model. That's the other figure, this nude model in the image. She is there ready to be painted, but he just can't. So in terms of the Die Brücke, like the distorted colors, I hope you noticed that, the yellows, the greens of his face definitely make him look sickly. He's very thin. You can see the sunken in cheeks, the hollowed out eyes. In fact, his eyes just look completely dead. There's no white spark to them where you have the white of your eye and then the pupil. There's none of that. His cigarette just dangles from his mouth. He's looking not at us, but just out in front of himself without any sense of direction or purpose. So everything about this, the distortions, the sickly colors, the objects within, but he can't use them, the amputated hand, just shows a man who is lost and deeply troubled and affected by his experience. Now, before we go back and kind of compare it to his earlier self-portrait, here are just some other images that he's done. He's also known, and this was before the war, of painting cities like Dresden, and showing the people and the feeling of life in the city. And you can tell, the colors are still distorted, the forms are still distorted, but yet the feeling is different than what you're getting when looking at his own self-portrait. So I'm going to go back really quickly just to kind of show you the contrast. And look how similar it is. On the left, soldier's outfit. On the right, he's got like his cool coat on, very bright complementary colors. He's got a paintbrush in his hand and a pipe, like out there being just kind of completely more like active and more at attention than the cigarette that's dangling on his lips in the self-portrait we have to know. The model is in the background, and he is clearly in the act of painting, and he's in a state almost of undress. So you feel it's a little bit more sensual, perhaps a relationship between the two of them on the right-hand image, yet on the left, he is completely disengaged with her and unable to paint her, even though she's completely presenting herself to be painted. So I would say formal qualities here, definitely color. That's part of the bridge and their art, is you're using color to express state of mind and state of being. And then for function here, absolutely self-portrait and emotional expression. So again, that is Self-Portrait as a Soldier by Ernst Kirchner, one of the founders of Die Brücke, or the Bridge, which is a branch of German Expressionism.